In 2019, almost a quarter of people admitted to being ghosted. By 2025, surveys show that more than half of adults report experiencing ghosting at least once in the past year. Apps made vanishing instant, and the numbers keep climbing. But the real story isn't the statistics, it's the psychology. Why do some see ghosting as efficient, while others experience it as deep emotional harm? And why does silence trigger the brain as if danger is near? In this video, we'll uncover insights from psychology and share practical tools to recover. First, let's see how ghosting itself has changed. Ghosting in 2025, from awkward breakups to digital disappearances. Ghosting in 2025 looks very different from what it once was. Decades ago, disappearing from someone's life happened slowly, almost predictably. Letters went unanswered, phone calls stopped coming, and rejection unfolded over days or weeks. The silence carried weight, but at least there was a trail. Envelopes stacked on a desk, a rotary phone that never rang back. Today, that slow fade has been replaced by the push of a button. A block, an unmatch, or a chat deletion can erase all signs of connection instantly. The process is more abrupt, more seamless, and for the person on the receiving end, much more jarring. By 2025, surveys confirm this isn't a fringe behavior. One large US study found that about 2/3 of respondents reported being ghosted at least once in the prior year. Numbers like that show ghosting has shifted from being an occasional social misstep to something closer to an everyday norm. And it's not only about dating anymore. It spills across friendships, workplaces, and even casual connections. In dating apps, it can happen after a handful of messages. In friendships, group chats often continue while one person quietly vanishes with no acknowledgement. In work settings, applicants report being cut off after multiple interviews, while employers increasingly see candidates disappear before showing up on the job. The common thread is the same: sudden silence, enabled by tools that make avoidance simple and fast. What stands out in these figures is what they suggest about conflict and accountability. Cutting someone off through silence has always been easier than explaining yourself, but technology removes friction entirely and makes avoidance an easy habit. Apps are built with options, block, unmatch, mute, that give people total control over how and when they withdraw from others. That doesn't mean people have become harsher at heart. It means the tools reshape the way people exit connections. Ghosting is often framed not as active cruelty, but as the path of least resistance when a conversation feels uncomfortable. This doesn't reduce the intensity of its impact. Research shows that ghosting isn't just an emotional sting, it registers in the body. In laboratory simulations, participants who were ghosted experienced spikes in both heart rate and blood pressure. That means the brain doesn't file ghosting away as a neutral, missed message. It processes it as social rejection serious enough to trigger fight or flight signals. The silence unsettles not just thoughts, but physiology. The contrast with older forms of ghosting is also important. For past generations, a fading connection gave space to absorb the reality. You could see the empty mailbox, the unanswered call. The decline still hurt, but you could chart its decline. Today's experience is more abrupt, more like a trap door opening and cutting off connection mid-sentence. That speed adds shock to the loss, leaving the person who was ghosted without context or clues. And because digital platforms wipe away entire conversations with a single block or unmatch, there are often no lasting markers of what the relationship ever was. The scope of ghosting in 2025 now stretches far wider than early definitions ever suggested. Casual acquaintances vanish after making plans, students disappear from shared projects, and colleagues quietly step back without official word. The word ghosting may have started as relationship slang, but by now, it captures a pattern of human withdrawal across nearly every social setting. Psychologists emphasize that what has changed most is the widening acceptance. Silence has become an acceptable substitute for explanation. And the more frequently people encounter ghosting, the more likely they are to normalize it themselves as an option. Avoidance sits at the center of this behavioral shift. Confrontation opens the door to uncomfortable questions. Why didn't this work? What role did I play? How will I respond to their reaction? Ghosting bypasses all of those uncertainties. Press a button, disengage, and sidestep the immediate difficulty. But psychologists repeatedly point out the cost of this shortcut. The ghoster may reduce their own stress in the moment, but the person ghosted often carries prolonged distress, sometimes months of uncertainty. In practical terms, it's a choice that resolves discomfort for one, but multiplies it for another. That theme, short-term relief versus long-term damage, is why ghosting has become a genuine research interest. Studies now link the experience with attachment styles and rejection sensitivity. People who already carry abandonment fears interpret ghosting as confirmation, while even those with more secure attachment still struggle with the confusion it leaves. What might feel like a small act of silence to the ghoster ripples as an outsized rejection in the recipient's mind. Digital silence doesn't blunt the blow, it sharpens it. In this way, ghosting represents both continuity and change. The continuity lies in the pain itself. People in every generation have felt the ache of an unexplained ending. The change is in speed and sheer frequency. Apps and platforms give younger generations no buffer of gradual decline. Endings come suddenly and cleanly erased. And while the cultural landscape adapts by treating this avoidance as normal, the human brain does not. Silence still registers as threat and rejection. That mismatch is part of why it cuts so deep. Understanding ghosting in 2025 means recognizing it as more than just a quirk of dating etiquette. It's a natural result of tools that make withdrawal easy, combined with a cultural trend toward conflict avoidance. It reshapes how people exit relationships, friendships, and obligations, leaving behind sudden disruptions instead of conversations. And because those endings land with real physiological and psychological weight, they matter far more than the ghoster often assumes. As we turn to the question of why so many people favor vanishing over talking, the reasons are not simply about efficiency. They open a window into the psychology of avoidance, comfort, and vulnerability. Why vanishing feels easier than talking. One of the most striking aspects of ghosting is how often silence wins out over a conversation. Even though humans are wired to connect through words, gestures, and interaction, many still choose disappearance as the easier exit. Psychologists suggest that the speed of modern apps encourages shortcuts. Opting out with a swipe takes less effort than sharing an honest explanation. The clearest motive people cite is conflict avoidance. Many believe that sending an honest message invites arguments, emotional reactions, or guilt they would rather not face. Research participants commonly say they ghost to avoid hurting someone or to escape confrontation altogether. From the ghoster's perspective, silence feels cleaner and less damaging than direct dialogue. Yet for the person left behind, the absence of explanation usually prolongs the pain, often far more intensely than an uncomfortable exchange would have. Another reason is control. Ghosting lets one person unilaterally decide when and how things end. No chance for debate, no negotiation, no opportunity for emotions to complicate the decision. That illusion of power can be appealing to someone anxious about being drawn into unwanted conversations. Yet beneath the surface, the act usually reflects fear of vulnerability more than real strength. Choosing silence may look decisive, but it often exposes an unwillingness to risk discomfort. Think about how sudden it can feel in practice. Imagine sending cheerful good morning texts for weeks, only to face total silence the next day. That abrupt break in a reliable pattern shows how sharply ghosting cuts. The contrast itself is what makes it sting. What felt normal and predictable collapses without any signal beforehand. Technology intensifies this. Instead of facing a meeting or carefully writing a message, people can now delete a thread and remove every trace of it in seconds. Blocking or unmatching feels almost like managing clutter, not closing a relationship. The ease of the action hides the severity of its impact. For the sender, it's a quick fix. For the receiver, it's an empty space that demands answers that never arrive. At its core, ghosting is a form of avoidance. Starting a conversation about why trust faded or why feelings changed requires vulnerability. Vulnerability risks exposure, disappointment, or rejection, which feels threatening. By ghosting, people protect themselves from that discomfort, but they also sidestep meaningful closure. And while the ghoster may avoid pain in the moment, the silence often plants insecurity, confusion, and resentment for the other person. Some ghosters defend the choice by reframing it as compassion. They convince themselves that silence spares the other person from hearing harsh words. In their view, no closure is gentler than painful closure. But intent and impact rarely align. What feels like mercy to one side often registers as abandonment to the other. A ghoster who believes they've softened the blow usually leaves someone else struggling with doubt and unanswered questions. There's also the immediate relief ghosting brings. The moment someone mutes notifications or presses block, their anxiety lifts. They no longer dread incoming messages. or the awkward explanation they hope to avoid. Life feels quieter. But that calming effect for one person is directly tied to turmoil for the other. What soothes one nervous system unsettles another. The trade-off is clear. Ghosting brings short-term relief to the one who disappears, but creates long-term questions for the one left behind. Silence may feel quick and efficient, but it fragments trust and denies both people the chance to practice healthier closure. In that sense, the paradox is sharp. What benefits the ghoster in the moment builds ongoing harm that neither side entirely escapes. And this raises an even deeper question. What does your nervous system do when someone goes silent? And why can that silence feel like physical pain? We'll look at the science behind that reaction next, because silence in human relationships is not neutral at all. It hits the brain in ways that resemble danger signals, and that's why ghosting leaves more than just confusion in its wake. The ghosted experience. Why your brain panics at silence. Neuroscience shows that social rejection activates the same brain regions involved in physical pain. When someone is ghosted, the anterior cingulate cortex, the area that registers hurt, lights up just as it does when you slam your shin against a table. Experiments measuring people's reactions to simulated ghosting reveal more than emotions alone. In one study led by Langley and colleagues, participants exposed to abrupt silence showed measurable increases in heart rate and spikes in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure compared to control groups. The body, in other words, doesn't separate words left unread from a physical blow. It responds as though something vital has been injured. That overlap explains why ghosting never feels minor. It produces what researchers call a social ache. Unlike a scraped knee or stubbed finger, this pain can't be seen, but the neural circuits involved in processing it are the same. Some lab studies even note that because rejection pulls at these pathways, people often report ghosting not just as hurtful, but as physically exhausting, sometimes leaving them nauseous, restless, or sore. This isn't exaggeration. It is how the nervous system interprets absence. Biologically, the reaction carries an old survival logic. For early human groups, exclusion meant being cut off from food, shelter, or protection. Those pushed to the margins of the tribe were less likely to survive. In that environment, failing to detect subtle signs of abandonment was dangerous. Our modern brains still use that template. When someone disappears without explanation, the alarm sounds as though your security is compromised. We no longer face predators lurking at the edge of campfires, yet the same circuitry fires when a screen shows delivered instead of replying. In the context of 2025, this wiring collides with the speed and precision of digital tools. Silence is no longer vague. It is stamped with red receipts, typing indicators that vanish, and time-stamped messages left hanging without response. These visual markers make the absence visible in real time, sharpening the sting. Each refreshing glance at a screen confirms, again and again, that communication has stopped. The brain interprets this as evidence that you have been cut off from connection, the modern equivalent of exile. That is why the ghosting experience often triggers obsessive thought loops. When no explanation is offered, the brain searches for one relentlessly. People replay conversations, parse emojis, scrutinize tone, and scroll backward through months of messages. Each gap in understanding invites another round of analysis. What slipped? Did a joke land wrong? Did a moment of hesitation give the wrong impression? The silence itself drives this spiral as the mind grasps for answers it will never receive. Psychologists note how this uncertainty magnifies stress, often more than a direct rejection would. Self-blame grows in these spaces. Because the other party remains silent, the ghosted often assign fault inward. Being ignored starts to feel like evidence of personal deficiency. Not funny enough, interesting enough, attractive enough. Without clear feedback, the imagination fills the void with criticism. Silence, in this way, acts like a mirror, but one tilted toward distortion, reflecting insecurity back at the person left behind. A single ghosting can therefore leave more than temporary pain. It can shift an individual's baseline confidence in future relationships. Repeated experiences deepen that effect. After being ghosted more than once, many begin to expect it. Uncertainty creeps into new connections, and trust becomes fragile. Even in safe, supportive relationships, a delayed response may provoke panic, as though abandonment is only a message away. Over time, this anticipation of loss reshapes behavior. People may guard themselves, withhold emotional honesty, or avoid intimacy altogether, because silence once meant danger. The erosion of trust becomes not just about one relationship gone quiet, but about the possibility that all future ties may empty out the same way. The physical body also carries the imprint of ghosting stress. Beyond racing thoughts, there are racing pulses, shallow breathing, tightened muscles, and restless nights. The nervous system revs up for a threat it cannot resolve. Rationally, a person may say, "It's just a text that never came." Physiologically, their body is preparing for conflict or danger. That mismatch is part of what makes ghosting uniquely confusing. A bruise has a cause and a timeline to heal. Silence offers no such clarity. The lack of closure prolongs the stress response, keeping the alarm system active longer than needed. This is why ghosting lingers. Physical wounds can mend, but uncertainty doesn't fade on its own. Without explanation, the brain never receives a conclusion signal, so it keeps running the same questions. What happened? Why? Could it have been prevented? That endless cycle can weigh heavily, sometimes leaving people feeling more worn down by ghosting than by arguments or even blunt breakups. Arguments, at least, provide data. Silence provides nothing but space. Space the mind fills with its own sharpest doubts. Recognizing that these reactions are biological responses, rather than personal weaknesses, is crucial. Feeling unsettled by silence says less about fragility and more about human design. The brain is built to register loss of connection as a problem. Understanding this can help reframe recovery. If your nervous system treats silence like injury, it makes sense to respond with care, self-compassion, rest, and reaching out to trusted contacts to stabilize the feeling of belonging. Just as a physical wound deserves tending, a social wound deserves attention, not dismissal. The ghosted experience, then, is less about missing a conversation and more about activating ancient circuits tied to survival itself. This explains why ghosting feels so large compared to the action that caused it. A blocked number looks simple on a screen. Inside the nervous system, it reverberates as danger. By acknowledging both the psychology and physiology involved, it becomes clearer why silence can shake confidence so deeply and why recovery often takes longer than expected. And yet, it isn't only the biology of the ghosted that shapes how this plays out. How a person responds to silence, and how likely someone is to use ghosting at all, can depend on something even more fundamental: their core beliefs about what relationships are meant to be. Destiny beliefs versus growth mindset, predicting who ghosts. Not everyone views relationships through the same lens, and these underlying beliefs often steer how people react when connections break down. Researchers often describe two broad frameworks: destiny beliefs, which emphasize fixed compatibility, and growth beliefs, which see relationships as something that can be improved and developed. These outlooks don't just influence how people start or nurture relationships. They also shape who is more likely to disappear without a word and who leans toward conversation or closure. Destiny thinkers operate from the idea that relationships are defined by fate. You either find the one or you don't. Compatibility is framed as all or nothing. If someone feels that spark is missing, the logic is simple. Why spend time explaining an ending when it was never meant to last? Ghosting becomes the most efficient way to move forward. Growth-oriented individuals approach it differently. They assume connection is built, not found, and that challenges are invitations to communicate, adjust, and learn. From this view, ending a relationship still merits a conversation, because even closure conversations carry lessons that strengthen future bonds. To put it more plainly, a destiny mindset sees good relationships as predetermined, and when something fails to click, ghosting feels acceptable. A growth mindset treats relationships as evolving processes, so breakups are approached as conversations, not sudden silences. Research supports this divide. One 2018 study found that people with strong destiny beliefs were about 63% more likely to see ghosting as an acceptable way to end even a long-term relationship. Findings like that highlight just how much our core philosophies on love determine the strategies we use when ties dissolve. Ask yourself for a moment, are you someone who searches for soulmates, or someone who believes relationships are workshops of growth? That honest check can reveal not just how you connect, but how you may disconnect. It's also important not to treat these patterns as absolute. Destiny-minded people don't always ghost. Many still explain their decisions, especially when they value respect or community. Perception. Growth-minded people sometimes ghost too, particularly when they feel unsafe, overwhelmed, or when direct confrontation could escalate conflict. The distinction is less about rigid categories and more about tendencies, probabilities shaped by long-standing beliefs. Generational and cultural forces shape these orientations as well. In many Western contexts where soulmate narratives dominate, destiny thinking can be reinforced by dating apps that frame compatibility as a binary swipe. It's either yes or no, and the next option is only seconds away. That makes ghosting more socially acceptable, since ending one connection moves you closer to finding the right one. In cultures or communities where family or communal ties hold weight, the growth perspective is often stronger. The assumption is that relationships demand effort, patience, and dialogue, and ghosting reflects irresponsibility rather than efficiency. Generational patterns are also visible. Adults who began dating before the rise of online apps often lean more toward communication, since their formative relationships relied on in-person or phone conversations. Disappearing entirely wasn't as easily reinforced. Younger people raised with instant matching and endless options often default toward destiny-like thinking, treating mismatches as disposable. Studies in recent years echo this observation, finding younger daters are quicker to describe faltering connections as not meant to be, and in turn, more likely to ghost when conflict or discomfort arises. The implications stretch beyond cutoffs themselves. Beliefs about destiny versus growth influence how people recover after being ghosted. Those who believe in destiny may interpret silence as proof the person was never their soulmate. This can sting more deeply because the rejection carries an air of finality. Growth-minded individuals are more likely to frame ghosting as feedback, however painful, and use the experience for reflection, asking what can be learned or how to approach the next relationship differently. While both groups feel the ache of rejection, their pathways forward diverge sharply. Technology compounds the effect. Apps amplify destiny thinking by reinforcing quick judgments and infinite replacements, while also offering growth-oriented individuals more chances to practice difficult conversations with partners they meet online. The tools themselves aren't destiny or growth. They serve as accelerators, fueling whichever outlook a person holds most strongly. The same dynamic plays out beyond romance. In friendships, destiny thinkers often conclude that the friendship just isn't right anymore, stepping back without explanation. Growth believers, by contrast, are more likely to pursue conversations about boundaries, misunderstandings, or distance. In work contexts, destiny-driven employees may vanish after interviews, viewing unanswered emails as insignificant loose ends. Growth-driven professionals feel more obligation to respond, even if declining an offer, because communication aligns with their belief in long-term effort. Across time, these habits build cycles. Someone who ghosts regularly reinforces their belief that explanations don't matter, strengthening the destiny framework. Someone who repeatedly opts for dialogue confirms their belief that communication is essential, deepening their growth orientation. Over years, such patterns become second nature. Ghosting or explaining isn't just a decision, it's a reflection of personal philosophy. So much of ghosting's mystery untangles when you notice these mental frameworks. Believing in destiny doesn't guarantee ghosting, but it makes silence more appealing when relationships falter. Believing in growth doesn't eliminate disappearance, but it elevates dialogue as the preferred avenue. Understanding this duality makes ghosting less random and more predictable. It often stems not from cruelty, but from worldviews about permanence and effort. And this brings us closer to the practical question. If ghosting reflects deeper outlooks, who exactly are the people most likely to vanish, and why? Profiles of ghosters, who disappears and why. Ghosting often looks the same on the surface. Someone vanishes without warning, but beneath that behavior sit different motivations. Psychologists outline several common archetypes of ghosters, and knowing them helps explain why silence shows up in so many different contexts, from dating to friendships to professional settings. The first archetype is the avoidant. These are individuals with avoidant attachment styles, people who feel suffocated when closeness deepens. For them, a text exchange turning more serious or a relationship reaching greater vulnerability activates discomfort they cannot manage. Instead of working through that tension, they retreat entirely. Studies link avoidant attachment and ghosting. Victims tend to be anxiously attached, while ghosters often score more avoidant. That means ghosting is less about lack of interest and more about evading emotions that feel overwhelming. A simple marker: when conversations move from casual to personal, the avoidant suddenly disengages. If you spot this pattern, A useful tip is to keep boundaries low investment early. Avoid heavy reliance on someone who withdraws when things grow serious. The second archetype is the conflict-averse ghoster. Unlike avoidance, these people aren't running from intimacy so much as running from difficult conversations. The thought of telling a colleague, "This collaboration doesn't work," or a date, "I'm not interested," feels unbearable. To them, silence reduces the chaos, avoiding what they imagine would be a messy confrontation. The irony, of course, is that the person left behind experiences far more distress through that silence than through direct words. Behavior marker. Conflict-averse ghosters often maintain upbeat or neutral contact until the very moment they vanish, avoiding any hint of tension beforehand. If you notice someone always sidestepping sensitive topics, anticipate the possibility of ghosting and prepare yourself by clarifying expectations explicitly. Even a simple question like, "If you lose interest, would you be honest about it?" can reduce risk. The third profile is the impulsive ghoster. These are individuals who act on feelings in the moment without much thought for aftermath. Their interest may swing quickly. One day they're enthusiastic, the next day they've disappeared. Sudden mood shifts or boredom often drive this type, not careful calculation. They may not even realize how disorienting it feels for the other person. Behavior marker. Erratic communication that swings from floods of messages to long silences before an abrupt stop. If you notice frequent instability in their responses, protect yourself by not overcommitting emotionally until their consistency proves reliable. A small step, like slowing your own pace, can prevent deeper reliance on someone prone to sudden withdrawal. The fourth archetype is the safety-driven ghoster. Here ghosting functions less as avoidance and more as self-preservation. If someone feels emotionally unsafe, senses controlling behavior, or fears escalation, silence may be their quickest route to safety. In these cases, ghosting is not cruelty, it's defense. Behavior marker. Sudden cutoff after an argument, invasion of privacy, or crossing of boundaries that made the person feel threatened. In such situations, the ghosting is protective. If you suspect that's the context, the best step is self-reflection rather than pursuit. Ask whether your own behavior or the environment might have triggered fear, instead of interpreting it as casual dismissal. The final major type is what we might call the convenience ghoster, enabled by digital platforms. These are people who see silence as the easiest option because technology makes it simple. Swipe left, unmatch, block, all framed as normal features in apps. When every interaction has a shortcut for exit, people begin to treat withdrawal as standard practice. The behavior marker is abrupt endings that coincide with app features. Blocked profiles, deleted threads, contacts removed overnight. For spotting this type, remember that it isn't deeply personal, it's environmental. To guard against it, keep perspective. Remind yourself that you're interacting within systems designed for quick exits. A practical move is to diversify where you're investing emotionally. Don't allow a single platform to define the entirety of your relational world. Together, these archetypes highlight that ghosting is not one size fits all.